When an author dedicates their book to their cat, oof, you know it's going to be good. Sapphic activity, female rage, and cannibalism are incredibly relevant to my scientific interests. In that order exactly. I mean, I have a crush on Shauna Shipman for a reason. And yes, I do need therapy. A lot of it. And quickly. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video, we're just going to be discussing the book The Lamb by Lucy Rose. If you're not familiar with this book, it's a modern coming-of-age horror folktale that follows an 11-year-old girl named Margot and her mother Ruth, who live isolated from society and sustain themselves by butchering and eating people who get lost in the woods and stumble upon their doorstep seeking help. However, one night, everything changes when a beautiful woman named Eden turns up and Ruth falls for her immediately. ... As a heads up, this video will contain spoilers, so you have been warned. Now, going by the polarizing reviews that I've read of this book, people either seem to love it or hate it. There ain't a lot of neutrality around these parts. Partner. And I fall into the camp of people who love it. What are we? The book contains elements of horror, folklore, feminist commentary, and lesbian activity, which, as mentioned earlier, are all highly relevant to my scientific interests. So it was very much my hemlock cup of tea. A little inside joke for those of us who have read the book there. I will say, and hopefully this doesn't come across in a condescending way, it's not meant to, but if it does, if you go into this book taking the narrative and the characters literally, instead of understanding that they are metaphorical, you may get frustrated with it, because there are parts of the story which read as contrived or slightly absurd without that understanding. The book is also marketed and described as a horror folktale, and as I'm sure most of you already know, the purpose of a folktale is often to convey social commentary or tell a cautionary tale and encourage critical thinking, usually through things like allegory, metaphor, imagery, characterization, and so on. And it's the same with The Lamb. Of course, that's not going to be appealing to everyone who picks up this book, especially those expecting to be immersed into a more realistic and meticulous type of horror, which perhaps explains a lot of the polarizing reviews. The writing quality in The Lamb, in my opinion, is fine. I found it smooth and poetic for the most part. I mean, I don't think the writing is exceptional, but the content of the book is so intriguing and thoughtful. It fleshes the writing style out, if that makes sense. Now, as a horror, in my opinion, the horror aspect of the book is embedded into the imagery. There's consistent descriptions of mold, rot, dust, blood, and stains that reflect the mental and emotional state of the characters and ties into the wider theme of neglect. Alongside this, the fact that the book reflects real-world horrors, such as the cyclical nature of abuse and, the manifestations of unaddressed trauma, is what makes the book disturbing. I would describe it as an emotional horror, or the horror of being human, more than anything else. Personally, I wasn't too disturbed by the cannibalism aspect, but again, the cannibalism in this book is metaphorical and a vessel for commentary, so it's not necessarily supposed to be terrifying as it is thought-provoking. Also, I think horror is similar to comedy in that it's subjective. What frightens one person may not frighten another, so people will have different opinions on how well this book works as a horror and in what ways. For example, I'm like a little bit of a clean freak, so maybe that's why I was like, oh my god, the dust and the mold. One aspect of The Lamb that I appreciate the most is how incredibly thoughtful, layered, and intelligently woven together the imagery and themes are from beginning to end. For example, there's a motif of the colour red, mainly associated with the character of Ruth, through the lipstick she wears and the wine she drinks. And it's not only symbolic of her bloodlust and butchery, but also her inner rage, her relentless desire, and the danger she poses to other people. There was also a consistent theme of infanticide, and a foreshadowing of Margot being killed and devoured by her mother throughout the book. For example, Ruth bathing her in boiling hot water, the kits hanging from the hooks, and the various comments from Eden and Ruth about eating babies and so on. So even though some of it is on the nose, the book is just incredibly juicy in the way of themes and imagery, commentary, and it's interesting to see how they connect to the narrative, the characters, and to each other. In terms of criticisms, personally, I feel that it's difficult to critique this book because there are parts of it where the story does feel rushed and contrived, and the character dialogue sometimes reads as, you know, a mouthpiece for the author to wax lyrical about some social issue, rather than being authentic to characterization or appropriate to the moment. These are just small things I noticed, but as previously mentioned, the book is part folktale, and, you know, the purpose of it is its commentary. Authenticity isn't really the point. So whilst the book isn't perfect, some of the criticisms can be forgiven within that context. Now, this book is just delicious to analyze and discuss. It's total book club material, and two of the most prominent and interesting aspects of it, in my opinion, are its commentary on womanhood and patriarchy through a female lens, and the way it explores and portrays women within the context of horror. Firstly, the book heavily centers around female desire, and it places women in the position of predator as well as prey. And what's interesting about this is the Lamb highlights and explores the misconception that women are harmless and unthreatening due to the associations of kindness and maternity attached to womanhood and femininity. And it portrays how that can be used to manipulate or lure people into a false sense of security. We're so used to seeing women as the victims of male desire and rage, both in real life and in fictional media, and the Lamb flips the script by placing the focus on women victimizing others through their desire and rage, which allows for a unique exploration of how anger and sexuality can manifest from patriarchy and unhealed traumas in women. In relation to this, I saw a comment on Goodreads that noted how in real life, women are so often reduced to body parts, especially by men, and this is true for media as well. But in the Lamb, women are the ones reducing others to body parts, which I thought was a good observation, and it's interesting to see the way in which the Lamb reshapes objectification through a female lens within the context of horror, and how that connects to the notion of womanhood or female experience as horror presented in the book. Female bodies are very gory, there's a lot of blood, pain and secretion that comes with womanhood, not to mention the inheritance of trauma and struggles with legal and social oppression that women have historically been and currently are subjected to. There's a lot to work with when exploring womanhood through the lens of horror, and the Lamb utilizes this to create commentary about female experience through its descriptions of menstruation and the smaller everyday moments of disrespect, injustice and sexism that colour the lives of girls and women, and these seemingly lesser moments build up to create a wider harrowing picture of how the biological and social experiences of women result in generational trauma, cycles of abuse and repressed rage. The Lamb also explores the cyclical nature of abuse, largely through the character of Ruth, who is an incredibly violent and damaged individual who abuses her own daughter. And Ruth is a character who, in a lot of ways, is a manifestation of female trauma and rage resulting from being born into a world where women are both figuratively and literally stripped of their primal selves, where they're policed and shamed over their desires, pressured into heteronormativity, and a performance of femininity. And because of all of this, there's a few ways to interpret Ruth's relentless desire to kill and consume other people. One interpretation is that her cannibalism is an outlet for her anger and a way of dealing with her trauma. It's the whole hurt people. And this interpretation is given weight by the fragments of Ruth's backstory, which reveal how traumatic her life has been, and by the tale Eden tells Margot about the beggar woman who has her fur stolen by a hunter, and then takes out her trauma on all the other women she knows, killing them in the hopes that she's able to heal herself, which is an allegory for the cyclical nature of abuse, and contains commentary about how women are stripped of their primal selves and peace by men, and as a result often lash out at each other because it's easier to outlet their hurt and anger towards other women or other vulnerable people than it is to stand up to those who hold power or confront and deal with the source of their trauma, which is relevant to and contains a lot of parallels parallels with Ruth's character, narrative, and her relationship with Margot. Another interpretation is that Ruth's cannibalism is her way of getting in touch with her primal self and rebelling against the constraints or expectations of softness and goodness that society places on women. And this interpretation is given weight by Ruth describing her love of violence and gore, by her unapologetic sexual appetite, and by the emphasis on her animalistic nature in the book. Another interpretation is that it's connected to the damage of heteronormative expectations and shame around female sexuality. Since Ruth describes being pressured into a marriage and ending up with a child that she didn't really want, and it's notable that she always takes the strays to be butchered in the bedroom that she once shared with her husband, because it creates a connection between the killings and that marriage. The strays being butchered in the once marital bedroom also, to me, symbolised Ruth's relentless desire for connection and union, which is yet another interpretation of her cannibalism, especially as she describes consuming people as a way to be close to them and keep them forever. So there's multiple interpretations about the cannibalism in this book, and I would love to hear your own thoughts and theories about it down in the comments section, because it's interesting. The Lamb also emphasises the difference between the natural state of women and the performance of femininity that women are expected to adopt, which strips them of their natural state. For example, there's a scene in the book where Ruth sees a hair growing from Margot's armpit, frowns and plucks it out. And it's such a short and simple moment that symbolises how women's primal selves are quite literally plucked from them due to ingrained notions of patriarchal beauty standards, and it's significant that it's a mother plucking the hair from her daughter, as it portrays how gender expectations and negative attitudes towards natural female bodies are learned and passed down from generation to generation. We also see how makeup, specifically lipstick, is used as a tool by Ruth to lure men into a false sense of security due to the associations attached to femininity that it represents. Ruth is described as performing femininity to disarm her victims. And what's interesting about this within the context of her character is there is a parallel between the true natural state of women being masked by the performance of femininity and the grotesque evil nature of Ruth being masked by the performance of femininity. And another thing I found interesting in relation to this is the book describes Ruth using lipstick to distract the attention away from her yellowing and crooked teeth, which quite cleverly symbolises the duality and performance aspects of her character. So the feminist commentary, imagery and symbolism in this book is really fun to sink your teeth into, pun intended. Another core aspect of The Lamb is child abuse, and Rose does a good job of highlighting how the inaction and apathy of onlookers who suspect or are aware that abuse is taking place can lead to devastating consequences, and also in portraying how normalised abuse can be for children, especially when they are being gaslit by their abusers. The book also explores the emotional complexities of abusive dynamics, with its portrayal of Margot's desperation to cling on to scraps of affection and approval from her abusers, despite their mistreatment of her, and through Eden, Ruth and Margot's, for want of a better term, love triangle of sorts. It also conveys how different types of love and possession often overlap or become enmeshed. So yeah, I thought the book provided a thoughtful and nuanced exploration of abuse, with it taking the hurt and pain of the abusers into consideration without excusing their actions. And I loved how Lucy Rose emphasises the thread of loneliness and desperation that drives and connects the characters and narrative. The Lamb also very much explores female sexuality, a lot of which overlaps with and ties into the themes of carnal desire and cannibalism in the book. For example, Ruth is described as consistently craving both physical and emotional nourishment, and as a result she has a revolving door of lovers who she always inevitably becomes bored by, which parallels her constant need for more victims to temporarily sate her hunger with through cannibalism. And this parallel is used to highlight how Ruth's brief romantic relationships, or flings, I don't know, lack true emotional nourishment and connection, resulting in this endless cycle of consumption. Ruth's sexually hungry nature also ties into her freedom from social and traditional expectations of women, and the fact that she is so unapologetic about her desires and just so generally rapacious is one of the elements of her character which makes her so engaging to read about. And interestingly, Ruth is also described as kind of reaching inside of her victims to consume parts of them, which from her perspective allows her to possess people forever. And this behavior is mirrored by Margot when she begins a suggestively homoerotic friendship with Abby and takes a strand of her hair to eat, hoping to keep Abby with her forever, which conveys the notion that children are taught how to love other people through witnessing the actions of their parents. And it also creates this fascinating intertwinement of desire, consumption, and possession, which again ties back to the prominent theme of human connection in the book. I also appreciate how normalized same-sex attraction is in The Lamb, with Ruth and Eden's relationship unfolding in a natural way without an issue being made over the fact that they're two women. And I think Ruth's sexuality is an interesting area of discussion because I perceived her as being bisexual with a preference for women, mainly because there are parts of the book which suggest that Ruth is the most enamored and emotionally satisfied by women, especially in comparison to her romances with men, which are often reduced to something shallow and fleeting. But there is also an argument that, Ruth could be a lesbian, especially as her connection with Eden seems to be the only truly fulfilling one. But I think it depends on how you read into it and how you kind of interpret other aspects of the book in relation to her character. Personally, for me, I definitely perceived her as bisexual because from how the book describes Ruth's respective interactions with men and women, it felt more to me like the selfish and shallow nature of men is what kind of prevented her from having a true fulfilling connection with them, rather than her lack of attraction to them. And that's a true bisexual classic in Sapphic literature, and maybe real life too, according to my TikTok feed. But again, let me know your own thoughts on this. I actually found the way that Eden and Ruth's relationship is described in the book to be incredibly poetic and romantic, and this created this almost dreamlike sheen around them, which is reflective of how it feels to be in love. And what's interesting about Eden is I was reading an interview with Lucy Rose where she shared that Eden represents a fulfilling connection for Ruth, hence why she is the exception to Ruth's relentless, literal and figurative cycle of consuming people and spitting them out. And that explains a lot of why that relationship in particular is portrayed as being healing for Ruth. She finally found the connection she was missing. And this contains a lot of commentary about shared connection through understanding of experience and similarity of being, which connects to the themes of homosexuality, mental health, trauma, and so on in the book. Interestingly, Eden is named after a river, and this connects to Ruth's first ever victim, who she describes as a river, and I quote, "Not powerful like Eden, she was slow and languid." And this is notable because the contrast between how Ruth treats the two women not only reveals a lot about Ruth's character and what she admires in other people, with water having a reflective quality, but also because rivers are symbolic of personal transformations, sustenance, life paths, and spiritual journeys, all of which are relevant to Ruth's narrative and relationship to these two women. They both nourish her, change the course of her life, and lead to transformations of self. Not to mention the connections between water and female sexuality. It's a little on the nose, but I enjoy how layered it is. Ruth's first victim is also implied to be a sex worker, and Ruth's targeting of victims who are lost or exist on the fringes of society reflects how marginalized and isolated people are often targets for predators in real life, because the police and public won't care too much about these types of people going missing. And through this, the book highlights how people's worth through the eyes of society is often attached to respectability and their connections. Ruth is also fascinated by this sex worker, which connects to both the sexuality and otherness aspects of her character. And otherness is a huge theme in the book, with there being a repeated emphasis on how disconnected Ruth and Margot are from society. They not only live isolated from other people, but they are also othered by their sexuality, mental health, and poverty. So they exist on the outskirts of society, both literally and figuratively, and they represent groups of people who are often forgotten about and invisible, which interestingly Ruth uses as a justification in killing her victims. Their lives are so lonely and awful, she frames it as doing them a favor. Ruth is also other in that she is a woman who unapologetically embraces her primal and dark nature. She doesn't care for society's expectations of women being soft, kind, maternal, chaste, and self-depriving. And that, alongside all of her otherness baked into her character, explains her rapacious need to consume people in an attempt to connect with them, since as a character, she is so disconnected. As for the ending, I was naively, considering the mountain of foreshadowing about her death, convinced Margot was going to be saved at some point, either by the bus driver or the last outsiders to the cottage, maybe, you know, contacting the authorities after seeing the state Margot was in. But no, it's a cutthroat ending, quite literally. But I have to say, even though I wasn't expecting her death, I didn't hate it. And I also understand that it happened in part to kind of highlight what inaction and apathy of onlookers of child abuse can lead to. I mean, the book is also a horror, so, you know, and as harrowing as the ending is, you know, it also frames Margot as a hero of sorts, whose death and cunning went on to save the lives of others, which creates a silver lining to her death. And I think her story can also very much be interpreted as how, you know, developing self-awareness, questioning harmful behaviours, and standing up for the right thing can stop cycles of abuse. Alongside that, I also appreciated how karmic, symbolic, and horrifyingly romantic Eden and Ruth's ending was, especially with the pair of them reaching for each other's hands after gorging themselves to death. Mwah! Chef's kiss. Pun intended. I thought it was a perfect conclusion for their characters. Well, I guess sometimes the lesbian death trope in media, it can be fun. Who knew? Overall, I really enjoyed The Lamb and I give it 4 out of 5 stars. And the author's, she's kind of hot, so, you know, maybe I'll give it 5 stars. I don't know. Okay guys, if you've read The Lamb, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment. And to see you guys soon. Bye. Goodbye, my friend. The Spice Girls split up due to a lesbian affair.